Все, включили, да? Угу. Спасибо большое, Дим. Я потом еще напишу, когда повторить ее. Хорошо? Угу. Спасибо. Good morning, my dear friends. I hope you can hear me. Please give me information about your presence during lecture. I'm so sorry for this delay, technical delay, and we should to work today very quickly because I'm very busy today. But I hope all information I'll be what I'll be try give you will be enough in order to prepare practical lessons. So we are starting to consider such course as base of systemic physiology, and the first lecture will be devoted to basal principles of functional system physiology. First of all, what we understand under such definition is a system. You know already what that there are anatomical systems. For example, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, excretory systems, etc. So, anatomical system is aggregate the structural interconnecting elements to carry out the definite function. For example, excretory system has function excretion of urine. Cardiovascular system provides by nutrients and oxygen our tissues and organs and other systems, etc. What is function? I remind you, it's a specific type of activity. For example, for heart, we know such function, main function, as pumping function, and the endocrine function as well. But specific function of heart is pumping function, and like this for all other organs and systems. Result of this function may be good or not good, and the anatomical system doesn't know it. What is good function? When human body is adapted to external environment. What is adaptation? I remind you. It's maintaining of homeostasis in different changes, constantly changing conditions of the external environment. And how our body knows it. In order to achieve the good adaptive function result and maintain homeostasis in response on some external factor action, need to assess it, and functional systems do that. So, what we understand under such definition as functional system, not anatomical, functional system. You can see here two definitions. It's a complex of neural elements and corresponding executive organs that are coupled in performing definite and specific functions of an organism. Its definition gave us Peter Anokin, its author, this hypothesis about functional systems. He proceeded this definition and give us information about different functional systems in our organism. But I propose you another definition, maybe more understand for you. Functional system is aggregate of different structures and organs, including the elements of regulatory systems, structures of regulatory systems, not only executive organs, that provide an achievement, the useful, so-called useful adaptive result. Useful adaptive result means our good adaptation to external environment, uh, maintaining of our homeostasis. What is maintaining of our homeostasis? It's our health. So it is self-organization, self-regulating, and non-linear systems composed of synchronized distributed elements. What difference between anatomical and functional system? You know that anatomical system provides any result. Its function of some organs may be good function, but maybe not so good. Functional system is structural interconnecting elements to achieve the definite adaptive result. Independent on adaptive result, there are three types of functional system. What kind definite adaptive result we mean? First of all, it's homeostatic functional system. We'll consider in our course, first of all, this type of functional system. For homeostatic functional system, this result is maintaining of homeostatic parameters. It's pH, blood pressure, osmotic pressure, etc. parameters by regulation, first of all, of internal environment of our body. Biological functional system more complex because this system systems provide realization of behavior acts in order to satisfy biological needs of organism. It's a more complex result, more complex needs of our not only body, of our life. And the most complex functional system, of course, are social functional systems, which provide realization of behavior acts in order to achieve some social results. For example, position of a person in society. You can see here structure the simplest functional system, main components of this system, and I mean homeostatic functional system. In this case, first of all, internal stimulus can accept by receptors, visceral receptors in our body, and this information comes to CNS, central nervous system, and after that we have some types of regulation, some actions from neurohumoral regulation and from our behavior. And these regulatory mechanisms change activity of our system, executive systems. You can see here cardiovascular system first of all, because this system is number one in mechanism of adaptation. It's kidneys, respiratory, respiratory system, digestive system, etc. All systems of our organism. And these changes causes some changes of homeostatic parameters, and these homeostatic parameters except due to feedback loop by receptors again. And if result, what kind result? Maintaining, for example, changes of homeostatic parameters which were under influence of some stimulus. And the maintaining of homeostatic parameters means that this functional system achieved the adaptive useful result. And in this case, this system stops its activity, and all functional system can be formed in other conditions. Here you can see more complex functional system, components of this system. When we want to achieve our body to achieve some satisfactory of some biological needs, more complex. For example, you are hungry, and in this case you should to do analysis afferent synthesis of many afferent signals. It's first of all triggering afferent signal if you are hungry. It's motivation, what you want to do first of all, have to lunch, for example, or go to practical lesson on physiology. It's a situational afferentation, in what conditions you are at this moment, what you should do in these conditions, and its memory. For example, you remember where you can have a lunch in restaurant, on to prepare to cook your lunch yourself, and some words about situational afferentation. For example, you know where restaurant is, but you haven't money for that. All this information you analyze, and after that you decide what you should do in this situation. And if you realization this decision, you carry out some action, and you can here action, and in result of that you have result of this action, and the parameter of these results can be accepted by acceptors, and if you achieve your aim in this situation, this system achieved useful adaptive result. And this system we consider this U later during future practical lessons and lectures. And these components of biological system you should know now, that components of this biological system includes block of afferent synthesis, its preparation for decision making and selection of an action in these conditions. It's a generation of action program, so-called efferent synthesis. It's performance of an action and assessment of result. And if you don't achieve the useful result, your aim in these conditions, you should correct of this program in order to achieve this result. And the most complex functional system, it's a social functional system. For example, for you it means, for example, if you want to be a doctor, and this system, as you understand, the most complex, and now we will not consider this system, but this system has the same components of or like biological system components for sorry components of social functional system. We need almost the same. It's efferent synthesis. You can see here again motivation. It's a triggering stimulus. It's memory. It's over afferentation and conditions of external environment. It's decision making. It's program of action. It's realization of action, which give us some result of this action. Parameter result will be accepted by acceptor of action result, and in this case we have comparison results of our action and prognosis of this result, and all this due to feedback loop, backward afferentation. And if we have we achieved expected result, in this case useful adaptive result achieved, and this functional system stop its existence. For example, finally you get diploma of certificate of doctor, and you become doctor, and in this case you can put another social aims in your life, but in general architecture of such complex functional system, I repeat you again, it's afferentation synthesis, which is which starting afferentation. It's situational afferentation, which we analysis as well, analysis of conditions. Then it's operation of the functional system, which includes preparation for decision making, efferent synthesis, decision making, selection of an action, prognosis of the action result, and the feedback mechanism of afferentation. So it's a comparison, the result of action and the prognosis result corresponds to the expected. So we have three types of functional systems, but we'll consider on first two types because it's physiological and biological functional systems. Social functional systems, it's more a subject for other scientific discipline and psychology and other maybe discipline, because it's very complex reactions, not only physiological of our system, but of, for example, some social systems, some conditions more complex outside our organism. Let's consider on first type of functional system, homeostatic system. For example, we'll consider such systemic mechanisms which provide adaptation and achievement of useful adaptive result during exercises, physical exercises. Physical exercises, and maybe if we'll have enough time, in other situations as well, more complex, for example at stress. first of all, these physiological changes concern changes of in functioning of cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and the activity of these systems very closely are conjugated very closely, and have the same systemic mechanisms of regulation, regulation of cardiovascular and respiratory system. And during physical exercises, what we have in this case? Increase of physical activity, contraction of skeletal muscles. Contraction of skeletal muscles increase of nutrients and oxygen consumption. And so we have decreased concentration of glucose and oxygen concentration in blood, because these substances are needed in order to process energy for contraction of muscles. And this decrease of concentration causes excitation of chemoreceptors in vessels. And the stimulation of chemoreceptors send sensory information to centers. And in response on that information, our body should increase of blood supply. What in this case occurs? If we have participation, of course, centers, nervous centers in regulation of this mechanism, we can say only about central level of regulation of cardiovascular and respiratory system. I remind you that mechanisms of cardiovascular system regulation includes nervous and humoral mechanisms. I remind you that nervous regulation of heart activity is provided by sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, and in this case we have opposite influence on heart. Sympathetic nervous stimulation of heart activity by changes of four main effects. It's chronotropic, chronotropic effect, inotropic, dromotropic, and batmotropic effect. If you remember, chronotropic means stimulation or increase of heart rate, inotropic contractility, force of contraction, dromotropic excitation, excitability increase, and batmotropic it's dromotropic conductivity increase, and batmotropic excitability of myocard increases in this case. And so the sympathetic activation during physical exercises exert positive chrono, dromo, batmo, inotropic effect on the heart, and it causes an increase of stroke and minute volume. So more volume, in this case more cardiac output will be in result of that, in result of sympathetic influence. But concerning vascular system, we have as well sympathetic activation, but you know that almost all vessels have only sympathetic innervation, mostly sympathetic innervation. And main effect of sympathetic activation is constriction of blood vessels. It causes increase of blood pressure. I hope you remember main law of hemodynamics. Linear velocity increases in this case, and volume velocity. So it means increase of blood supply, and together this blood, it means increase of oxygen concentration and delivery of nutrients, glucose for example, to tissues. So useful adaptive result, maybe one result, it's increased blood supply by nutrients and oxygen is achieved. What we have after physical load? Of course, in this case, our needs in oxygen and nutrients becomes lower, and after physical load, this functional system stop its activity because blood pressure is higher. Blood pressure and blood supply higher than it needs without physical exercises. And in this case, receptors accept concentration, chemoreceptors, and the receptors of baroreceptors in reflexogenic areas. Do you remember? I hope these areas, it's carotic main areas, reflexogenic areas in vascular system, for vascular and for respiratory system as well, are carotic sinus area and aorta arc area. And the excitation of these receptors sends stimuli to cardiovascular center in medulla oblongata. I hope you remember. You can see here carotic sinus and the arc of aorta, and the sensory information comes from these areas. Again, you can see here, from these areas comes to medulla oblongata, and this higher than it needs pressure causes decrease of activity of pressure center in hemodynamic center in medulla, and nervus vagus decreases of heart rate, force of contraction, and the decrease of impulsation to vessels along sympathetic centers. So result of that is, summary result of that is decrease of blood supply in corresponding their decreased needs. So we have after physical load maintaining of calm physiological state. We have rest state in this case, and decrease of our needs, and regulation of activity, decrease activity of cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. Let's consider let's consider more complex situation when we should to adapt to a strong external factor. We accept each day many such factors, not always, of course. For example, for you such factor is exam, but maybe not online, only offline, when you have contact with direct contact with examinator, and in these cases, when we are in a stress situation, this change occurs in the result of influence of higher located centers, not only medulla oblongata, which accepts sensory information from our receptors, but from such structures as cortex and hypothalamus influence. And in this case, we meet not only nervous mechanism of regulation, we have and humoral mechanism as well, which is involved in this regulation. It's more inert mechanism more slower mechanism of reaction, you know already, because nervous mechanism provide fast reaction on some factors, humoral mechanism not so quick. But just humoral mechanism provide long-term adaptation to external environment. And in this case you can see that some sensory information can comes to vital respiratory and cardiovascular center in medulla oblongata from brain cortex, from hypothalamus, and in this case different influences, different changes can occur under influence of these structures. Humoral regulation, I remind you, is carried out by hormones and biological active substances. And during stress, these changes under influence of nervous centers, highest nervous centers, and humoral regulation is provided by so-called hypothalamus, hypophyseal, suprarenal glands X. So, three main structure: hypothalamus, hypophysis, and the suprarenal glands, which interacting provide physiological, which are responsible for providing of physiological providing of stress. You can see here picture which demonstrate us that classic model of stress, and all physiological reaction which we have during stress can be described by changes in such model as predator and predator, you can see here, and sacrifice. In this situation, what should do this individual? To run away or to attack. Attack can, of course, it's impossible for this animal, but to run maybe. And in this case, we have as well intensive, extensive physical load, extensive work for our muscle. And the physiological mechanisms which we can observe during this reaction, during stress, it's mechanism which is provided by, first of all, medullary hormones of suprarenal glands during first stage, during alarm reaction. What physiological sense of this reaction? It's increased metabolic rate by these changes. It's stimulation of lipolysis in fat cells in order to give energy during metabolic degradation of lipids, and it's a mechanism which we have just considered. It's increased rate and force of contraction of heart and the stimulation of heart activity and constriction of blood vessels in order to increase blood supply, these nutrients and this oxygen. Concerning respiratory system, in order to provide more oxygen and concentration of oxygen in blood can be increased. For that, we have some physiological effect in relation to respiratory system. It's dilation of bronchioles. You should remember that it's a sympathetic effect, sympathetic activation we have during stress. It's as well sympathetic effect on respiratory system, and stimulation of respiration, of course, and other effects, dilation of the pupil, pupils inhibition of certain non-essential processes, for example, digestive system inhibition. And you know three stages of stress reaction, which described by such scientists as Gans-Cellier. It's alarm reaction. During this reaction, we have activation of sympathadrenal system, effects we have just considered. It's stage of resistance, and during this stage we have activation during alarm reaction, it's activation of sympathadrenal system. So it's sympathetic system and adrenal glands, suprarenal glands, first of all, medulla hormones, medullary hormones. During stage of resistance, we have activation hypothalamus and hypophyseals, and result of that we have increase of concentration of corticosteroids, first of all glucocorticoids, and due to that we can get stable adaptation and resistance to all the dangerous factors. And stage of emaciation, sorry, mistake here, or rising of some pathological states and diseases. So adrenal glands provide all stages of stresses, and in result of these changes we have more energy in order to provide physiological reaction and achieve useful adaptive result. To run, for example, and in this case we have our life without any factors which can stop our life, and of course we have during this more complex reactions and more complex functioning of more complex functional system, biological functional system. We have many different physiological effects which aimed to achievement of these useful adaptive results, not only cardiovascular and respiratory system, but these systems are the most important in providing of our adaptation and the achievement of adaptive useful result. You can see here main physiological effects during during realization of this reaction, and some information about these physiological effects. So I told you that not only nervous system, not only sympathetic division of autonomic nervous system provide this reaction, by regulation, humoral regulation as well. I remind you that besides glucocorticoids, during first stage of this stress reaction, we have provided by such hormones as epinephrine and norepinephrine, the same effect as sympathetic division. Together, sympathetic division and epinephrine and norepinephrine of suprarenal glands increase heart activity, increase blood pressure, and increase of blood supply. But not only, because other humoral factors can influence on these processes. And I remind you in this table you can see a large spectrum of these humoral factors. Okay. I remind you that, of course, not only vital centers provide this functioning of this biological functional system. It's centers which are located in hypothalamus and brain cortex as well, and in result of all this, this center has two functional parts: vasomotor center and respiratory center as well has two parts in medulla oblongata. It's inspiratory and expiratory center, and not only because we have a pneumotaxic and apneistic center in pons. You can see here structures of vital respiratory center in hindbrain, and hemodynamic center as well. Again, two centers which provide different influences on this main adaptive system, cardiovascular system and respiratory system. And highest centers, it's hypothalamus and brain cortex. Hypothalamus, I remind you, very important center, which is, we can say maybe that hypothalamus is mediator between external environment and accepting of external factors by brain cortex, and regulation of internal environment of our body, because here we have centers, highest centers, which regulate temperature, water salt balance, our emotions, because hypothalamus is included in limbic system. This system is responsible for emotions, you know already. It's highest center of vegetative and endocrine regulation. So many mistakes today, sorry. And not only these centers regulate internal environment, but we have centers of motivations of our behavior. For example, saturation and hungry, thirst, satisfaction, sexual satisfaction as well. So this structure, which play very important role in functioning of biological functional systems. You can see hierarchy of these centers which regulate respiratory system and cardiovascular system, and concerning participation of cortex in these reactions and functioning of this system, we can say that first of all, in our cortex, the sensory areas, sensory functional areas of cortex play important role in acception of sensory information, in acception of external factors. Okay, very quickly, because I repeat again, I haven't time today, but I hope this information will be enough for you in order to prepare next practical lesson. I repeat again, what is the most important for you from this lecture? That function, anatomical system give us presentation about some function, but what is this function good or not, we can our body can assess due to functional system. And functional system, in functioning of such functional system, the most important moment is feedback mechanism, because feedback mechanism give us possibility, opportunity to assess this result. We achieved the result which we want to achieve or no. Feedback mechanism. And you should know components, you should know types of functional systems, 3 types. First of all, we want the homeostatic system, and we have just considered concerning such homeostatic parameters as concentration of glucose and oxygen in blood during, for example, physical exercises, and more complex physiological system, it's biological physiological system. During if we know to get more complex result to satisfy our biological need, in this case more complex functional system we have considered on example this stress. Of course, if you didn't understand something, you can consider, you can ask your teacher during practical lessons, and I hope next lecture I will not in a hurry as today. Sorry, and thank you for your attention. And after week we have next lecture. Goodbye.